experience too, but I've been lucky enough to meet some geniuses in my day. And geniuses come in a couple of different flavors. Some are like Foster Gamble, Alan Green, Anton, who still remember what it's like to be a regular person and know how to relate to people as a regular person, know that not everybody is as smart as them, and not everybody has these concepts that seem so obvious. So Dan is the kind of genius who's so smart, and he thinks that everybody else is kind of at the same level. So you'll find that he talks fast, and he assumes that everybody knows a lot of these basic things that he just comes naturally to him. So do your best to keep up. Maybe like get a little bit close to the screen and really watch. I guarantee there's a lot of gold in there, but he goes really quickly, and some of it might be a little advanced, but it's absolute gold, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
And he's got a YouTube channel. You can go in there and really navigate through the immense quantity of information and different topics that he talks about, etc. Okay, so have fun. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll go with it.
Hi, everybody. Hi, boys and girls. I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, flameinmind.com. And yes, today is about turning the study of sacred geometry into something very practical, but with a very specific scientific electrical understanding, hopefully in language that's fun for the kids. So far, I'm hoping that Marco in the course with the kids has talked a little bit about what we call the Star Mother Kit implosion, which is, you see there's a tetracube in the center, green, the red balls are octa, and then they stellate to dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, an infinite three-dimensional, quote unquote, fractal, where the inside is like an onion, looks like the outside. And as Marco suggested, we do want to understand why in the center, where waves converge in a cube, the tetracube, two tetra make a cube, you can almost see that in here, that when the waves converge in a tetracube, the ratio of edges are all powers of 2, square root of 2, the octave basically. And now we've learned by doing equations and fun stuff that when waves converge by powers of 2, compression is not possible, which is very good for putting a hex on something. I mean, making an ice crystal. I mean, stabilizing things. But it is the opposite of compressibility, and implosive compressibility or fractality is the subject of this whole conversation. So compressibility happens when you take that cube and you tilt it 32 degrees from the floor, and the angle of that cube in that dodeca now is 32 degrees, the chin angle of sync. You spin that cube, blink 5 times, and you've got this pent dodeca in white here. And then you stellate straight out by golden ratio, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, and that's the only possible three-dimensional fractal, as we say. Now later, and that's our Star Mother Kit, goldenmean.info/kit. Now later, I wrote fun equations to prove that that's how hydrogen is built. And that's how gravity is made. Now that's getting esoteric. But the idea is that we have prepared some visuals for you. And the core principle behind all those visuals is what we call implosive collapse. That if waves compress in such a way that compression is called non-destructive, it was one of Einstein's favorite terms, that when the compression is non-destructive, the wavelengths of charge add and multiply recursively by golden mean ratio. And that adding and multiplying always constructively means that implosion is possible, which is to say the charge gains centripetal inertia during that perfect collapse called fractal. Remember that advanced scientists these days are all rather much in agreement that perfected charge collapse is basically the cause of gravity and consciousness. So if somebody taught what is the cause of charge collapse, they would answer conventional physicists' question, which is, why do objects fall to the ground? I mean, what is the cause of gravity? And what is the cause of consciousness? And what is the cause of life? In fact, what is the cause of all self-organization? We call that neg entropy. You know, entropy is movement toward chaos. And they tell you the universe is condemned to entropy. We say, they're lying. No, there is a way out of chaos called neg entropy. And that self-organization specifically happens during implosive charge collapse. And so now we have a bunch of really fun pictures. Hopefully, even if there's some science in here, it's eye candy. So if I take that golden ratio, see the sine wave in the center, going towards center of the cilia dodecacosa, I see that that can go on forever, moving out a 3D fractal. And because that seed in the center starts what's called the Planck length, which is the musical key signature of every wave in physics, and then you simply multiply by multiples of golden ratio, you have what's called Planck fire, the fire generated by Planck. PlanckFire.com is the title of my new book, which is one of the leading books on Amazon for wave mechanics. Now, what we're about to suggest is this cascading imploding of golden ratio sine waves is actually the secret to the physics of what is a soul. You see, in spiritual tradition, they say a soul is what makes you immortal. But has ever an electrical engineer told you what a soul is? Well, that's me here trying to tell you exactly that. So what we believe is that when that kind of compression happens around your aura, then your aura implodes and emits something called coherent longitudinal, which is a wave phenomena that is compressional or scalar. And that coherence after compression in your aura, for example, the Tibetans called it the rainbow light body, Gurdjieff called it Kesjan body, and Christians call it the soul. But now electrical engineers can measure that, and that's what I'm here to explain, hopefully in simple terms. There's a very important story to this Maury, we think, because if you watch movies like here in the Pod generation, where the lady decides to have her baby outside her womb, oops, and then they start to notice those babies can't dream. Could it be there's something about soul which is lost when you inhabit only a machine? Well, how are electrical engineers going to teach what a soul is so we avoid that mistake? And that's why I'm here. So our book on how to do the very simple hygiene to gather the charge to enable implosion, called Bliss, or the Quality of Grace. I have a book on that. It's called Implosion, Secret Science of Ecstasy and Immortality, and that's the web link, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. So, boys and girls, finally, the real physics of the Wizard of Oz is revealed. A wizard, could it be Dan Winter, emerges from behind the curtains in The Wizard of Oz? Okay. Well, of course you knew the yellow brick road is the golden spiral, just as Elena Danaan just announced Fibonacci leading golden ratio is the secret of the universe. And you knew the lion is courage, the tin man is heart, and the scarecrow is brain. But did you know that staying awake in the poppy field is how you wake up in a lucid dream? Did you know that if you can lucid dream, we can electrically almost prove that you can take memory through death? And that dream golden compression is a doorway into a crystalline longitudinal array called the Emerald City. Welcome to Oz. And that coherence in the dream is literally, that is called a longitudinal array. It's a compressional wave, sometimes called scalar. So the electromagnetic waves travel as transverse, generally, like our radios, but to use the part of the wave that's compressional or scalar called longitudinal, you have to have very excellent organized compression, visualize pine cones kissing noses, and we'll have pictures in a minute. So we started this school for kids called JediSchool.Science. You know, when Luke Skywalker raised the Jed, and there's a picture of what a Jed tower looks like in Egypt. And the Jed is literally the plasma projection of longitudinal coherence. And Luke Skywalker, he didn't do that in a metal building. No. Luke went deep underground in nature to raise the Jed and became a Jedi. An example of our friends Jedi down there where Marco is in Brazil, if you go to our rainmaking project, here is our Jed engineers at work. So there was a huge fire approaching the village. I mean, life-threatening, absolutely. And the teacher had read our work on how to make rain, gathered all the kids, and they made a golden spiral out of special quartz piezo crystals, which is implosion of charge. And then the kids basically prayed and did a dance, and they were blissful and radiant. And suddenly, huge rainstorm saved the town. And if you'd like to see the film, in Brazil of the teacher explaining what happened. Check it out at goldenmean.info/rain. So that is an example of creating centripetal force. In fact, the physics of what turns water vapor into a droplet is called Christos, to crystallize. And that centripetal force is the trick, the key, because conventional physics doesn't really know how anything gets centripetal. And that's probably why they don't know why objects fall to the ground, but also don't know the cause of consciousness, soul, and life. So we're here to teach the cause of centripetal, which is implosive, opposite of centrifugal. And the geometry of how that's done, here's an example. So this is called the caduceus. You probably recognize, and you don't have to worry about all the technical terms here, but basically this caduceus wave shape is the result of the equation named PlanckFire.com. You multiply Planck by golden ratio and then keep doing that, and then you're done. That's Planck fire. You make a flame out of Planck. And that's the harmonics in blue, but look down here, the harmonics in green are the actual Schumann Earth natural resonance harmonics. There's a technical term for that. It's called phase conjugate pump wave. And if you know how to use that implosive wave shape, is, for example, how pyramids are called the Hummer and they make electric power. And we're going to see more visuals about that. This is some of my background. So we use that caduceus implosion wave shape. It's called phase conjugation. It's literally a wave that's fractal, and we use it to do all these fun technologies. Theraphi, which is plasma that heals and rejuvenates. Flame in Mind, we teach it for brain waves with kids, and we teach it in the Imploder, and we're going to show you pictures of all that fun stuff. So this is the serious science behind charge collapse. Now, in the brainwave harmonics, which are the same frequencies as Schumann, when you teach kids those harmonics, they begin to see without their eyes. And now here, Jean-Charles, who was present for our lecture near Paris, he made those brainwaves at higher amplitude, and he teleported repeatedly with witnesses. And that may sound a bit scary, but actually the implosion to the longitudinal array is this key to many secrets. Anyway, this is a little background behind the book, and we're not going to go into all that now. Planck Fire, you can see the pictures. And here are the 5 books at planckfire.com, which you can see. And here's the kids' book. And this is what happens when you take that number, Planck, and multiply by golden ratio. You get hydrogen radii, ADP, you get photosynthesis frequency, you get the sacred foot, you get the Schumann brainwave harmonics. Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, and precessional year are all predicted by charge collapse. That implosion creates, self-organizes that negentropy. That's a very important science of implosion. And here's just to take the top view. Don't worry about the equation. But you see in the top view where it looks like a rose, that's actually the radii of hydrogen, very accurately predicted by Planck and golden ratio, meaning that the reason hydrogen exists is because it's a golden ratio fractal. And the way it makes gravity is because it's a golden ratio fractal. So this is, the book is in print. So we have a whole series of new tools to teach this to kids like you, geometricmodels.org. For example, here, not only do you see golden ratio anywhere exists, but on the tool, you can actually see what power of golden ratio times Planck you've reached. For example, here you've reached exactly golden ratio times, Planck times golden ratio to the 164 power, which happens to be 1 British foot. So not only is the ratio right, the scale is right. And by the way, the ancient Sumerian, the tablet of Shamash, they knew not only the ratio, but the scale to create charge collapse, which defines sacred dimension. You want to build a sacred temple, you want to build a sacred space, you have to create charge collapse. And here's the proof that that British foot, which is a golden ratio, that's Planck, actually is the key to virtually every ancient sacred unit of sacred dimension: royal cubit, Palestinian, Roman pace, megalithic yard. You see, all those dimensions are actually the geometry of perfect collapse. And that perfect collapse is the principle: negentropy, implosion, self-organization, the fun stuff. And here you see that same cascade is the frequencies you make in your brain waves here on the left when you have bliss, ecstasy. You measure that, we measure that with flameinmind.com. And those same frequencies are the actual frequencies happening in your spine liquid when you have Kundalini and bliss. It's called sacrocranial. The same equation shows the same frequencies. And that equation also shows in photosynthesis, only golden ratio times Planck is the frequencies that make photosynthesis. Fractal phase conjugate is the reason photosynthesis exists, because it's implosive. And here is where I invented the term heart coherence, realheartcoherence.com, and you can see we're measuring the infrasound of the brain waves here in white, and here is the infrasound of the heart rate variability of the heart in red, simultaneously showing if your girlfriend said your heart is not hooked to your head and you would like to demonstrate otherwise, go to flameinmind.com. So this is an example of, we do a lot of biofeedback work. And so here is basically the same star mother kit, the nesting of platonics. And remember, platonic nesting, the star mother, makes golden ratio. And that was the model Kepler used to describe planetary orbitals. And later we learned that planetary orbitals are the primary ratio is golden mean ratio. And the same nest of platonics, star mother kit, is literally exactly the way your chemistry teacher should be teaching you the geometry of the nucleus. Here's tetracube octa, the nuclear geometries. And here's tetracube octa, the geometry of all the electron shells, SPDF. So if your chemistry teacher is not using this to teach you how electrons nest and how nuclear hadrons nest, then your chemistry teacher is not empowering you to visualize for yourself the principle of what holds atoms together, the centripetal force named gravity. So this is that same geometry, dodecacosa, which is the geometry of the Earth grid, the nodes of that longitudinal array. And here we showed you how the pyramid, which is here, takes the Schumann harmonics, which are here, and vibrates piezoelectrically, called the hummer, which is how the ancients described the pyramid. And at the center of the vortex cone of that implosion of charge in the massive piezoelectric pyramid, out the center of the vortex, the transverse waves are focused into what's called longitudinal coherence or scalar. And the longitudinal array then is global wireless power, and it is how the pyramid becomes what's called a gravity diode, a one-way gate for gravity. And literally, the pyramid is a way to stabilize gravity and atmosphere electrically, gravity diode, and a way to make global wireless power, which is that longitudinal array. There are some things here that Tesla didn't understand, which is that longitudinal had to be created by Planck and a lot of other things. Basically, he didn't understand even where the sacred sites are is the longitudinal nodes. So here's the picture. When you focus the charge down a vortex, the side view is the caduceus. So coming in is a transverse up and down, coming out is the longitudinal. And that squirt gun, the nozzle, is the dimension of Planck, where the translation of vorticity happens, changing transverse to longitudinal. And the longitudinal waves, the scalar, is actually how gravity waves are made. It's the substance of gravity waves, if we believe Tom Bearden, and we do. So then here's a little slide we're not going to do now, but when physicists talk about dark matter, it's only them admitting they basically don't have a clue why objects fall to the ground. So there was extra gravity laying around. They called that dark matter because they didn't have a clue and they were embarrassed. So I suggest you can suggest to your physics teacher, they might apologize to you for not knowing why an object falls to the ground. Because if you don't know why an object falls to the ground, you can't know the cause of consciousness or life or anything self-organizing. That's another story. So this is the Ark of the Covenant. It's an implosive capacitor, which is how they contained the nukes that the Anunnaki needed to navigate. A bit of a long story. Here's our actual physics paper on how we took a simple equation saying that when waves interfere by golden ratio, it is the solution to constructive interference, called Navier-Stokes equations. So we proved that golden ratio is the solution to constructive interference, therefore the solution to compression, therefore the solution to gravity, to consciousness, to virtually every problem we have, like urban design and history of computing. It's all the discovery of compression. And here is the fractality in golden ratio. So as Marco is suggesting, what's the relationship between golden ratio and fractality? Well, here it is. The Mandelbrot set is divided by powers of golden ratio. It's literally the perfected fractality. In fact, golden ratio is the perfection of self-similarity by inspection. So Schumann harmonics, Bliss waves. And later we're going to talk about how this implosion, this implosive black hole, is literally how you plan for successful death. Because if you can do this compression well, you begin to lucid dream. We have a slide on that. And if you can lucid dream well, which is propagate longitudinally into the songline dreaming track, it's demonstrable that you can take memory through death. So this is Jean-Charles Moyen, our friend, who is rather famous for making this extreme golden ratio harmonics in his brainwaves just before he replicably teleported multiple times with witnesses, returned with sand between his toes. It's a very fun story. You can see about that at flameandmind.com. This is where we're teaching kids who learn to see without their eyes by using the same harmonics, the same cascade, alpha between alpha in green here, and the pink lines are octave harmonics. The blue lines are golden ratio harmonics. And when kids learn to make this bliss implosive cascade in their brainwaves, not only do they begin to be able to see without their eyes, here you see blindfolded, but they begin to become clairvoyant. They see their grandmothers and their parents freak out. But we know what clairvoyance is. It's simply this ability to achieve longitudinal coherence, which is where the ancestors reside. So this is a vortex, and it has to do with the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, uses golden ratio. More pictures of the brainwaves. Here's 5 harmonics in my brainwave in golden ratio, and me having a bliss experience. I can do that cool. Had many years of Kundalini, but kids, in order to actually have the lucid dreaming and some of the other fun stuff, you got to climb all the way up to gamma, which is the high 40s here. And I didn't quite make it there yet. So I have work to do, actually, by my own physics. So this is more brainwaves. Here, I want to try to answer Marco's question about emotion. Do you want to ask that question again, Marco, even?
Can you explain what is the relationship between emotion and our health, and why it's also related to sacred geometry?
So basically, this is an old friend of mine, Manfred Clynes, who famously invented what's called sentics, the wave shape of the emotions. And of course, he was a violin player, very famous. And he noticed that if he played the violin with lots of rubato, where you touch the violin string and then kind of move it with, quote, feeling, and if he did that with feeling correctly, then people would cry. He really liked it when people would cry when he played the violin. So he studied that, actually. So he did millions of trials. He designed what's called a centometer, which is just, it's a button on a spring. That's all it is. And if you record the shape of the pressure, when you touch that spring and you pass paper behind it to record the shape of pressure over time in the touch that says, I love you. And if he did that a million times, basically, that's what this microsound means. And he discovered these were, in fact, the documented, replicable, around the world wave shapes of emotion. Now, it turns out that if you take the beginning of the touch and the end of the touch, and then the point of maximum pressure right here, you get a ratio. Hint, hint. Now, it turns out that if you want to say, I love you, when you're squeezing someone, there's a very specific technique, actually, which is, look, when you squeeze someone, their hand or their body, doesn't matter, to say joy, the point of maximum pressure happens at 1/6 into the duration. What do we say about the hex? Stability, joyful, yes, okay. But if you want the cup to runneth over and to say love, ooh, the squeeze, the hug, you need to practice this for your lover, for sure. The squeeze that says, I love you is very, very different. The point of maximum pressure in the squeeze that says, I love you, is delayed tantrically until 0.618 into the duration of that love hug. Very academically precise, don't you think? Now, the reason the love hug reaches maximum pressure at golden ratio is because that makes implosion. And that implodes the cascades of harmonics, which is called embeddability. So you literally create this implosive shape in the love hug. So this is an introduction to the geometry of emotion. And this is the map of the geometry of successful death. For very thousands of people, they had them draw the geometry of vision at death. And it's lattice cobweb tunnel spiral. And we now know what that is. Your body is preparing to compress, implode, to radiate the longitudinal coherence, which is the only way through death, as it is the only way through lucid dreaming, actually. And so what happens is your DNA recursively braid implodes, superpose each next axis of spin symmetry. So the way through death is actually, you know how people, just before death, I saw my whole life, it was compressed. Well, why? because your memories have to be squeezed into an array, a distribution. Ancestor memory lives in that longitudinal array called Dreamline song track. And that's literally the implosive requirement. Successful death is electrically contagious. Death visions are contagious to all the surgeons in the room. Our friend measured that. And so successful death requires compression, and ghosts get dizzy at death if they can't do that compression. And that's why certain devices like our plasma help release stuck ghosts, because we know what a stuck ghost is electrically now. This is just to say, we're going to finish this here. We overdid our time budget, but basically, university literature has shown what frequencies trigger lucid dreaming. Remember, lucid dreamers take memory through death. They have a soul. Well, this is the harmonics that trigger lucid dreaming in successful university trials. And here is our Theraphi plasma regularly triggering lucid dreaming. What we do is we trigger the implosion of the pine cones of compression, and your body then begins to radiate the coherent longitudinal, the Ba from the Ka, the Tantra, all of that good stuff. And this was one of our plasma experiencers saw the Holy Grail. This is what our Theraphi plasma looks like. We just take a noble gas, which is called phase conjugate optically, which is implosive, and then we modulate with infrasound, which is the same caduceus I just showed you. And then we implode that with an RF carrier wave through a bifilar Tesla coil at 500,000 volts. And we're doing rejuvenate negentropy in 25 countries successfully, and there's a long waiting list for this technology. And this is the shape of the wave between the two plasma tubes. Here it is in Egypt, and here is the Medical Association for the first time learning what their logo is for, the double caduceus. The implosion point here is Planck, and that's the cascade. This is the actual frequencies right here that we feed the Theraphi to cause this implosion, and this is Planck, the circle at the center. So the sweet spot, implosive negentropy in the plasma is broad spectral, big pine cones kissing noses, and creates an implosion place. And by the way, that is dramatic for triggering seed growth as well, and plant growth. And here's some of the live blood cell trials before and after. We have hundreds of these trials now. But we get derouleau, it's called declumping, and the blood cells literally become stronger. Now we have about 6 different devices which use this principle. This is called PiezoFire. This is plasmafire.com. Here is the documentation that we can cause plants to grow that same centripetal force. So we've been talking about, that's the transverse wave up top, and this is the longitudinal wave here. And when the longitudinal waves implode, when they cross at center, there's the French version. I guess you didn't need that. So it's only the longitudinal part of the wave which can exert centripetal compression implosion at center. That's why, that's, for example, how you reduce radioactivity. And this again is that chart about implosive longitudinal. These are the equations which proves longitudinal waves are made, what gravity is made of. And this is more the raising of the Jed pictures. I think I'm going to, the slideshow goes on and on about the vortex and origins of pyramid studies, and it's way too long for our conversation today. But you get the flavor that once you begin to understand the principles of implosive compression, which is what sacred geometry is for, then you can learn the definition of sacred space, sacred dimension, how you get a soul, how you enter the longitudinal array, how you lucid dream. There's so many important life questions answered once you begin to understand the physics of implosive compression.
I'm going to stop sharing, and we have Dan Winter here. So if you guys have any questions or want to talk to the Wizard of Oz here.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Nice to meet you.
So Maxi has a question. Maxi is an incredible asker. Maxi, what question do you have?
I didn't, well, I did have a question, and but I also just wanted to say, Dan, I loved your video. Oh, and a fun fact is that I'm also a lucid dreamer, actually.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's
Yeah.
a very important skill. They say it predicts who can take their memory when they die, and it predicts who's a shaman. It's very important.
So that was my question. It basically predicts what will happen.
Well, what we believe is that as people evolve and their aura learns to compress better, and then the body, during that compression, the glands and the blood, the DNA, that implosion of when you have a lot of bliss, or when you spend a lot of time in the woods and you're absorbing charge a lot, we call it the quality of grace, then your body begins to emanate what it technically is called coherent longitudinal, what Gurdjieff called Kazjan body, or Ba from the Ka, or the Tibetans call rainbow light body, that your body begins to emit coherently into what is an array, the grid, the longitudinal array, or ancestor memory. And so that coherence is what enables you to perceive in a lucid dream. It also may predict the onset of clairvoyance, because you're seeing what we now recognize is the longitudinal or compressional component of the electromagnetic, which is how classically ancestor memory is seen. For example,
Thanks.
just to say, the kids who learned to make those frequencies in their brainwaves of coherence, and then they could see, while blindfolded without their eyes, those same kids began to get clairvoyant. So you might notice, if you're in the woods sometime and things are quiet and a little bit magical, if you don't begin to see a few things, elementals, nature spirits, fun stuff.
Thank you,
Uh,
Maxie.
Thank you, Maxi, for your question.
Thank you.
Longitudinal, how can I understand longitudinal in a geometric way? So, one sword goes to longitudinal, no? Is what the one sort of wave movement goes to the longitudinal. Can I understand both of those ways of movement of waves in a geometric way?
Very appropriate. We have, of course, a bunch of animations on this. Fractalfield.com/conjugate mind. You'll see our animations on this. But briefly, let's start with ocean waves or water waves. As the wave is moving, some part of the wave motion is up and down like this, as the wave is moving, and some part of the wave motion is compressional, or in the direction of propagation. Very practical example. When you have a tsunami under the ocean, there's an earthquake, and then the wave is going across the ocean as fast as a jet plane, but a boat on the surface will not know that it went over that wave. That's a longitudinal wave in the ocean. Now, when that compressional wave, longitudinal tsunami, arrives at the shoreline takes that wave, which is moving this way, and then begins to press it on the shoreline. And now the wave starts going up and down. And that's what makes the wave high as it gets to the coast, and that's what messes everything up. So there's always a compressional or longitudinal component and an up and down or transverse component, and it's just a matter of how much of the inertia is traveling in a wave up and down perpendicular to the direction of motion versus how much is traveling compressionally parallel to the direction of propagation. That's true of water waves. It's true of air waves. Most of the inertia of sound waves is longitudinal. But in electromagnetics, most of the inertia that we use for our radio and all our good stuff, we use the transverse or up and down component, and science knows very little about how to access the longitudinal component of electromagnetic waves, even though we now believe that's actually what ancestors used. They called the songline Dreaming Track Ancestor Memory Collective Unconscious, and clearly is a physics of telepathy, and the equations prove that's the stuff of gravity waves. So longitudinal EMF is very interesting.
Okay, so longitudinal and transverse,
Transfer.
right? Does it have something to do with this and the star mother? So between these two, cube octa, tetracube octa, and the dodecaicasa?
What we believe is that tetracube octa symmetries in nature or in all of wave mechanics, because all the edge length ratio in tetracube octa matrix, all the ratio is square root of 2, the diagonal, all of the, and that's called the octaves. It's all based on octaves. And if you do the math and do the wave equations, an octave prevents constructive heterodyning, constructive interference. It's maximum destructive interference, which is perfect for crystallizing. Like that's why a snowflake is hex. It's very stabilizing, but it is the opposite of compressible. Versus the dodecacosa, all based on pent and golden ratio, invites implosion compression, and that's the opposite, and that's centripetal force. Every living thing is based on golden ratio, we think, for that reason, like DNA. And here's the point. We believe that your body's ability to make that coherent longitudinal stuff, what they call the Kesjan body, you know, some people, spiritual tradition says that's the stuff of your immortal body, actually, the rainbow light body, if you believe the Tibetans. And your body's ability to make that coherence, the stuff you take with you, the stuff that makes a big aura, depends on successful compression, implosion, because that's what makes you centripetal. It's obvious, you know, if you ever met a Draco, you feel a vice-like grip because their attention is very centripetal, and it's been measured. Focus attention is implosive and centripetal. And when you get centripetal or implosive, you do compression well, that gives you access to bliss, and actually gives you access to stargates and portals and cool stuff and longitudinal, and implosion is like racing the jet, man. Cool stuff. So you need the pent.
Okay, Maxi has a question here.
Go ahead, Maxi. Are you unmuted?
Aha, there.
Go ahead.
All right. So, just before you came on, like 20 minutes before you came on, Dan, I asked Anton on if you need something to get something else, like you need energy to create matter or something, and you need heat for survival, then how do you create the first thing if you have nothing?
How did we create the first thing? Hey, you know, that's a good question for a physicist.
Yeah, we have nothing.
We had nothing. How do we make the first thing? Very good question. Well, if we look at physics very fundamentally, most physicists agree that there is simply a unified field. In other words, everything is made of the same stuff. Well, what is that same stuff? In physics, it's sometimes called ether or even simply charge. Visualize simply a compressible media, like a universe made of jello, very compressible. So we think that's basically charge, where compression and rarefaction of that universal compressible medium, technically it's called a superfluid. And that's a unified field, a compressible media charge. And that's what everything is made of. Now, when that charge, it's obviously not stuff, it's not matter at that point, it's a compressible superfluid. But, here's the but, if something causes a wave in that charge to begin to rotate, spin. Now, that spin, it's like a gyroscope. You know what a gyroscope does? If you try to push it.
Yeah, I know what a gyroscope is.
Good. So if you try to push a gyroscope, the faster it's spinning, the harder it is to push. And that's because it's stored what's called inertia. So when the gyroscope's going really fast, you can't push it over because it's stored a lot of inertia. Well, in physics, the amount of that inertia is called mass, which is the only definition of matter. So the amount of spin you have is the origin and beginning of mass. It's the first time we had any stuff because charge rotated. And also, by the way, when that charge rotates, it has a period of rotation. That's spin. And that period of rotation is the only origin or definition of time, which is only simply rate of spin, nothing else. So by rotating, suddenly I have mass and time. Ain't that cool? That's how we made the first stuff. Now, what enabled it to rotate? Oh, the symmetry of the models that Marco just showed you. That's how you make the atomic table, is you nest those rotations in the tetracube, that's the S and P suborbital, and the D and F suborbital of the whole atomic table, that's the dodecacosa. So you do the geometries that Marco showed you, and suddenly you made the whole atomic table. And it turns out the nucleus and the electrons both use the same nest of platonic solids to grow.
I have one more question though. If we need spin to create the first thing,
Yep.
The spin of charge,
Yep.
then how would we have charge if nothing was created yet?
Well, that's it. So charge is essentially a name for compression versus rarefaction, which is the uncompression. So you compress and rarefy the universal compressible media, the ether. You can call it ether. Physics uses the word. You compress and uncompress the universal ether, and that's named plus and minus charge.
Yes, but there's still nothing to compress or re-s or something.
I mean,
Verify.
it's very appropriate for you to ask the question, well, if there's a universal compressible substance and it's everywhere, we call it charge or ether, you should ask, where did that come from? And we are quite clear, we don't have a clue. But we think there is a unified field, and Einstein seemed to agree.
Yeah.
Oops.
Wait, where did he go?
I think your question short-circuited Dan's brain and his internet. But we'll look for him to come back in.
Let me ask
He
him.
left the meeting. No.
A ver.
Yeah, he was like I can't, yeah, does not compute. I can't
If
go back
anybody's
from-
brain is broken, it's mine.
I was just going to say, Nassim, and I'll let you add on to this. Nassim has a very, very similar theory about how matter gets created. So this unified field, as you know, is super, super dense, 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cubed, right? Which is like, you can fit all of the matter in the universe in that amount of space. So it's infinitely dense. And what we see as matter is just that spinning. He uses the example of in a bathtub, when you pull out the plug, there's all this water in there, but what you really see is the structure of that vortex as it's going down, right? And that's basically when we look at an atom or we look at matter, it's that spinning within the unified field. And with that, we'll let Dan back in.
Yeah, but how can there be any of this unified field stuff if there was no unified field stuff to make the unified field stuff?
Remember, Maxi, that when we were talking about space, we were saying that empty is the same thing as full.
Hello.
Or that it can be better understood as something that's full, not empty. Okay?
That's right. The scientists agree that the vacuum is not actually empty, that the unified field, a slushy superfluid named charge, is everywhere, and that it's circulating even where we think there's empty space. So the unified field, you can kind of think of it like a religion, but most people have to agree the field is unified. In fact, it's said that that's why we believe in a unified spirit also.
So something like infinity,
Yes. Well, meaning infinite.
Infinite.
Knit by phi.
That's brilliant. Well, Maxi, I'm afraid we're not any closer to understanding how the unified field was created, but I love the question and I love how it got everybody's wheels turning. Let's bring on M here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great questions, Maxi.
Really.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Em. Go ahead.
So that's Em. I'm Tracy. I'm Mum. I've got the question. I hope this is appropriate. I think it is. It's kind of. I'm going to have to watch these videos again a number of times, but my question is maybe not as technical as Maxi's. So you talked about clairvoyance, and I regularly visit a medium.
Mhm.
So a woman that does mediumship, and she channels my mum who passed away 2 years ago. And so my question's more on that kind of level, like, can you explain? So as I was listening to the different parts of what you're talking about, and I think the more linear, I can't remember the wording. My brain's also gone to a mush. How does a medium access the connection with a spirit? And I mean, I've got no question that what she channels when she's channeling is 100% spot on and the spirit of my mother, because she's telling me to details. I mean, I go there for advice on a regular basis, and she brings in people to help, certain old friends actually to come in and give specific advice at times. And it's phenomenal. I mean, it feels to me phenomenal. I don't even really question it. I just listen and absorb and walk away. But now I'm questioning it after listening to your talk on a completely different level.
Your question is wonderful, and I think very appropriate for the kids too.
Okay.
I could make one comment is that after I had Kundalini, where you feel the lightening up your spine, intense bliss, for about 20 years, I noticed that I became not clairvoyant, but a little bit clairaudient. So I was in Cherokee burial ground and I began to hear the ancestors. Would that freak you out? Oh, maybe. but then later, and I actually sometimes hear Valerie's ancestors, really. I'm not good at it, but occasionally. Anywho, in terms of the physics here, remember, we were teaching kids to have bliss experience and to see without their eyes. And we do that. They're measuring their brain waves, and they make alpha, the Schumann, and then a cascade up to about gamma, 40 hertz. And so when their brain waves make this cascade of harmonics, literally implosion, then they begin to have this skill that they're blindfolded and they see a little vortex form inside their head and they see a tube, and then they begin to see without their eyes. This is very, very famous. You can read about it, flameinmind.com/outer vision. And it's a planetary phenomenon. All kinds of kids are seeing without their eyes. Some of them can see through their fingers. Amazing. So it turns out that perception is actually the ability to grab a hold of a vortex of charge. That's what perception is. It's literally a tornado. And by the way, we understand now how you take that ability to perceive, how you take that outside your head, which many medical surgeons have personally reported. They saw from outside their body. It's very famous. So we think we understand some of the physics. So why am I talking about that? Well, as I said, just after many of these same kids begin to see without their eyes, they suddenly start to talk about seeing their grandmothers. And then their parents freak out. Very common, actually. So this is our clue. Now, the clue is that this implosion in their brainwaves enables a centripetal compression, which allows the inner vortex inside their head. And they all say the same thing. Oh, I close my eyes, I see a little vortex tube form, and suddenly it becomes an eyeball. You're seeing because it's a vortex of charge. That's what vision is. That's why you can take your vision outside your head. Anywho, when that vortex is very compressed, then it can sort the waves much better, and it can begin to see the longitudinal component and not just the transverse. And we think we're quite positive what the Aboriginals, and I knew many of them, they call this the song line, and they called it ancestor memory, and ancestor memory was their name for God. And if you didn't sing to these ancestors, your life wasn't worth living. If you were an Aboriginal, if you're not talking to your ancestors, you're doomed. So anywho, this is an array, and we think the Catholics call it a communion of saints. Jung called it collective unconscious. We are very clear, and we can prove this is absolutely the physics of telepathy, for example. So this array travels with the grid, the dodecahedral Earth grid. And if you're on a magnetic line or it's sunrise or sunset, it works better, and we know why. So ancestor memory is very real, very electrically, and we electrical engineers can describe how to measure and how to improve that perception. We think we could help your friend get better at it by teaching her things like, oh, sunrise, sunset, solstice, compression lines, a stone circle, a cross in the forest.
We live near Stonehenge.
Exactly.
We live just down the road from Stonehenge.
There you go.
We're on the magnetic line.
at the right time, that compression event that sharpens that vortex. And then you can see this longitudinal component. And literally, now let's explain one last thing to the kids here. Hey, kids, when you die, we're pretty sure, let me say, we're pretty sure of this. You know, just before you die, you see your whole life pass before your face. There's a sequence of geometry you see when you die. It's very famous. It's called the Heinrich-Klüver form constants, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And it is proven you're likely to see that just before you die. It's like a spider's web and then a vortex. So the geometry of what you see when you die is well known. And you know what that is? That's your body doing compression in order that you can die well. Why? Because that's how you get into that array. And that's why we even have technology that can help really stuck ghosts. Because if you don't do compression well and you die dizzy, you can't be compressed and enter that array. And by the way, and I'll stop now, kids, let me give you one more clue. The emotion of anger does not compress well. Hint, you cannot take that through death. Where the emotion of love, things you care about, compresses beautifully. And you can take that right through death, and all your memories go with you. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Dan.
I think that's so fascinating, and I think it leads into so much of probably your own genius, Dan, of being able to tap into information that maybe you weren't even mentally aware of. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like how you started getting the insights that you did, and if you think you were sort of tapping into various vortexes by having the insights that you did.
Well, let's interpret that question to mean, what is the suggested hygiene? Like, what did I do anywho? What did I do to get there? Well, I mean, I used to be able to talk fast. Okay, I had a fast head, but I went to this place called the Gurdjieff School, and I started doing sacred gymnastic. Or Gurdjieff. It's not unlike the Carlos Castaneda tensegrity or Sufi dance. So I started doing sacred dance, actually. And then I was doing the meditations. Gurdjieff, he talked about Kesjan body, but you have a lot of ways to talk about it. But anyway, then I started having bliss experience. I started having Kundalini. Kundalini, like you're feeling this energy come up your tailbone, and then your top of your head lights on fire. It feels like a torch. And then I wrote a book. I made documentaries on the biophysics of Kundalini because I was adopted by Ben Bentoff, who wrote the book. It's goldenmean.info/Kundalini. You can see the story in great detail. Anywho, so I had intense bliss experience for 30 or 40 years, intense Kundalini. And in that process, sometimes Kundalini is called you just went insane. On other times, Kundalini is called physics. What's the difference? Well, if you understand it. So Gopi Krishna or Krishnamurti, they had intense Kundalini, but they did not understand it. Whereas I was adopted by a biomedical engineer, quite famous, Ben Bentoff, during my graduate studies on psychophysiology, and I began to do the electrical engineering. Those low frequencies in your spine liquid that are the physics of Kundalini. And if your spine liquid is pumping, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. And so that spine liquid pump creates a double vortex in your head. It's called the ringing of the ventricle horns. And we actually measured the ringing in the ears heard by meditators and did equations. Fun stuff. Anywho, so yeah, then I began to hear some ancestors, and then I began to think even faster. So, this intense bliss is powerful, wonderful, and energy dense, and can be dangerous because if you don't remain grounded. So the first thing we recommend is read the book Earthing. Did you spend enough time barefoot in the mud? Otherwise, you float away.
Fantastic.
There's dietary aspects of this as well, which is, you want to eat live food, avoid processed food, et cetera, et cetera. And remember that every time you eat some piece of animal, you're going to have to digest and process that memory, for better or for worse. And the other thing is, every time you sit at a magnetic line cross and find sacred space, your aura is going to get bigger. Every time you sit in a metal building full of electrosmog and bad air, your aura is going to get smaller. So this is simply a matter of everything you do is about absorbing charge. And, you know, Christian, they call that grace, but it's actually electrical engineering.
Awesome, Dan. Well, I can see the wheels turning in all of our students' heads, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on and talking with these brilliant kids that we have. And I just imagine, you know, if I had gotten this information at their age, you know, what a difference that can make. Because obviously it makes a huge difference now. But I'm really excited for these guys to just open up their consciousness, open up their ideas of what's possible. And thank you so much for helping us do that.
Well, actually, it's my dream to teach kids. I think you guys are fabulous. I love your twinkle, and I haven't had the opportunity to teach such magic kids ever, and I'm totally grateful.
Excellent,
I hope
excellent.
to spend more time with you guys. It's all fun.
And Anton, thank you so much for putting together your amazing presentation and gathering together those animations. Can everybody unmute and just say thank you to these brilliant teachers?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Mark.
Marco.
And thank
I
you,
don't-
brilliant
who is-
students.
Who is Marco?
Marco's the guy with the shiny head.
He has two names.
I thought your name was Anton. I thought your name was Anton.
Double name
That's
like you.
something that
four.
Dan Winter just told you that my real name is Marco, but now I go by the name Anton Voxel. That's my artistic name.
But like all geometries, there are multiple sides. So there are definitely multiple sides to him.
He's very magical too, for sure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, amazing students, for your amazing concentration and questions and attention, and for staying a little bit longer. I know it's worth it. So be well. We'll see you again soon. And thank you so much, everyone.
I love meeting you. Hope to see you again. It's been wonderful. What a blessing.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Toodles.
Andrew. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.